Hey everybody, thanks for joining. We're going to give it about a minute until we get started. Just let a few more people trickle into the chat. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for joining today. We appreciate your time. Today, Katie Johnson and I are going to be talking about protecting your short-term rental business. My name is Jeremy Holden. I'm with Savvy Realty. We're the nation's largest brokerage for short-term rentals. I'm an active investor myself and a licensed realtor. I'm located out of sunny Scottsdale, Arizona. I have 9 short-term rental properties. I'm the lead educator at our local real estate investment association for our short-term rental track. And my job is to basically help folks access the Phoenix market using my vendors, using my local market expertise. And then we partner with folks just like Katie to ensure that our owners and clients are protected. Katie, thanks for joining today.
Yeah, so great to be here. So I'm Katie Johnson. I am an attorney and also a host too. So I've been hosting since 2015. My husband and I host and manage 10 properties in Michigan. So I'm based in Michigan and Holland, Michigan. If you guys are familiar with that, it's like this beautiful lakeshore community, and we manage everything around an hour from our house. And, I'm also an attorney. So I've been an attorney since 2011, and I decided to marry my two passions and start my own business, STR Law. So I help operators across the country make sure that they're legally protected, whether it's through LLC formation, asset protection, contracts, templates. I offer a variety of templates on my website, strlaw.com, and trademarks if you want to like protect your brand or anything like that. So anything transactional, I'm happy to help folks across the country on as it relates to Airbnb. I'm an operator too, and so I really understand everything that you guys are going through in the trenches.
If anybody has any questions throughout this, feel free to put it in the chat and we're going to get rolling. Katie, let's start with the real risk in the landscape around short-term rentals.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's all sorts of risk when you're diving into short-term rentals, whether it's guest injury claims, local compliance issues. Like I've had clients buy properties thinking that they can short-term rent them, only to find out that they have a deed restriction or that the town doesn't allow them. They're not in the right zoning. So that's really common. And so you just really want to make sure before you buy a property that you know you can buy it. Co-host disputes. So if someone is managing for you or if you're managing for someone else, you just really want to make sure that you have that agreement set up and documented before you start so you don't have any disputes once you get going. And then direct booking chargebacks. I personally haven't experienced a chargeback, fortunately, but I've had clients who experience them. That means where someone stays at your property and then they say, actually, I want my money back. And they do that through a credit card dispute, right? So that can happen for you if you're doing direct bookings or if you're doing VRBO, you are merchant of record often with VRBO. And so you can actually have a chargeback when you have bookings with VRBO. And then we're going to also talk about here today partnership breakdowns. So I know a lot of people love partnering with folks to like make their money go further, but just if you're going to do that, you really want to make sure it's more than a handshake deal. I've had clients who have done partnerships who then decide they don't want to partner anymore and didn't set it up, and now they're suing each other when it could have, been avoided by just setting it up on the front end.
Your realtor is typically going to be your first point of contact for a lot of these items, just to give you like a refresher or just give you a high level. But it's really important to have an attorney just like Katie in our back pocket. Like your realtor is there to be a fiduciary to help you purchase the property. They aren't licensed realtors. They aren't licensed attorneys. So it's really important to take things that your realtor says with a grain of salt and really um, cross-reference it with an attorney. I would say the biggest thing for me as a realtor is I do have a lot of clients. They'll ask very specialized questions, and then I'll direct them over to Katie to make sure they get answered. What I don't think is a good idea is using Claude or ChatGPT. I do think that AI right now is playing a role where a lot of the big buckets on the screen, AI can give you some directional advice, but I do think that we do need to go to somebody like Katie to make sure that we're actually getting legally bound advice um, from a professional. Let's talk about the generic platforms. Like, what do they cover, and then what don't they cover? We all know we have Airbnb and VRBO. Uh, there are pros and cons to each. What do we think here, Katie?
Yeah, no, for sure. So Airbnb, VRBO, I mean, you're subject to their terms, right? And then once you have on Airbnb with their terms of service, once you have more than 6 properties, a lot of times they're going to be looking at you first for any claims, like through your insurance company versus them. That's in their updated terms of service that they updated this year. So that's something to be aware of with that. And then it's up to their discretion on whether they want to approve an air cover claim. I've had people who put air cover claims in, for a broken item or wear and tear on the property, and Airbnb will deny it. And they'll say, actually, we think that your $1,000 claim is worth 200, and that's how much money we're going to give to you. And you're kind of stuck at at the whim of what they want to do, right? And then, having your own rental agreement can help you here because you can set out those terms and say to your guests and set those expectations of what happens if something, if someone takes something off of your property or things like that. Set those expectations to be able to charge them if needed and things like that. But I would say that people will rely on Airbnb and VRBO terms, but it's at the end of the day, it's your home that you're renting out. And so you want to make sure that you're covered and have a really good agreement that covers you and protects you, because Airbnb or VO are looking out for themselves, not you.
The things that are really exciting about Airbnb, right, are having a family come and stay for Thanksgiving, say, we had a great time designing the house, right? Getting great reviews, payouts. Um, these are the not sexy things that we have to talk about. And if I put on my owner hat, I think there are things that we can do to make sure there's more longevity to our business. So I think over the past 5 years, air cover has gotten less and less convenient, less and less convenient to push through claims. Everything's been offloaded to date to call centers, and it's extremely cumbersome working with them. There are plenty of third-party providers that essentially act as like a rider insurance. My short-term rental management business has it, where for about $55 a stay, we essentially get up to $10,000 worth of coverage. We use that all the time. Now, are we putting in like sheets and small stuff? No. Um, but we had a situation where somebody punched a hole in the wall at the same time. They broke a coffee table, and they also broke a bed frame. Everything was covered through our own insurance, which was great. And we also didn't have any conflict where we had to go reach out to the guest. If we go through air cover, right, we first have to request the guest for money. The guest usually is not in a state of mind where they're willing to do that. They may or may not hold you hostage for a bad review or a refund. So I think having additional insurance is important. What else can we do? Um, Good homeowners insurance. I think it's really important to look at like your loss of rents. I've had situations at my properties where water heaters have blown up, and we had essentially to cancel about a month worth of stays. Airbnb didn't care. Same thing with VRBO. Instead, we went through our insurance policy. We got everything remediated. We showed them proof that we had to cancel our bookings, and we actually got everything paid for, which was awesome. What else can we do? The last one's getting a home warranty. I think that's a hot topic for short-term rentals because people have had differing experiences with home warranties. Um, I use American Home Shield out in Arizona, and what I found is for a $75 call fee, they'll come and they'll basically fix things. So I think just having all these additional layers, in the short term, might put a little bit of hurt on your pocket, just having to pay for these extra things. But I do think that when it rains, it pours, and that when things do turn awry, you'll be very grateful that you have all these extra protections and you're not relying on a platform or an OTA to cover you. Let's talk about rental agreements. Everybody's used to getting their bookings, and there isn't really any formal lease agreement associated with it. What do you think here, Katie?
Yeah, I mean, I always recommend a rental agreement. I always say there's, 4 pillars of protection for you when you are setting up your short-term rental to really mitigate risk. And one of those pillars is going to be a rental agreement. And I think they're really important because one, will set out expectations between you and the guest in terms of, maybe what your cancellation policy is, extenuating circumstances for cancellation policies, if at all, that exist, that you're not going to have a chargeback or no chargebacks. The chargebacks aren't allowed. It'll set out expectations for occupancy, and then the biggest thing, of course, is really important is an indemnification and liability cap. So you can even put that they're going to indemnify you and hold you harmless, meaning that by entering the property, that they're assuming any risk at the property and that they will hold you harmless for anything that happens at the property, right? So those are really big, important clauses, especially if you have anything that's a little bit more high risk, like a pool, for example, would be high risk. A hot tub would be high risk. A cliff, things like that. Maybe like a staircase that's a little bit different, different things like that that would be high risk. I mean, a rental agreement alone isn't going to save you, but of course, it's going to be one of those many things that can help you if something were to happen at your property, right? Every state is different, so state-specific language is important. And some states have really specific short-term rental statutes, such as North Carolina. They have a specific short-term rental statute that tells you exactly what your rental agreement must have and include. So it really just depends on the state. But with these rental agreements, you know, they will help you in terms of if there was something that happened. Like, so if a personal injury attorney comes and you can provide them a rental agreement in addition to, having your home in an LLC and really safe home practices, like, that where you're making sure that your home is safe and operable, that can really help you if something were to happen at your property, turn it from like it was your fault to it was like a freak accident and, not preventable. So that's why I think that these rental agreements are really helpful in the short-term rental context. Now, granted, if not everyone is signing them, there's always this question of can it apply to everyone who's staying here, right? This is a hotly debated issue. It's really state specific, depends on the state, but I still do think it's worth getting a rental agreement signed by the booker.
Arizona is a pretty landlord-friendly state, and I always try to think about it from the perspective of squatting, just as a realtor. And I have some colleagues in my network that actually have smaller properties, meaning they're in a spot where they have a guest home in their backyard and they're renting that out, or they have a condo. And what we find, at least in Arizona, with a lot of these smaller situations, a lot of folks that are in some sort of bind will end up booking on VRBO or Airbnb for a stay. And the smaller the property, right, the less revenue there is. So they can lock a property up for, $100 for a night, $200 for 2 nights, and they'll end up squatting. So I think having a very, very tight keeping on rental agreements is really important, that if you do go to an attorney like Katie and say, hey, I need a referral for eviction management, the first thing they're likely going to ask is like, hey, do we have a rental agreement? And, in those rental agreements, there's very specific language, at least for the Arizona Association of Realtors with our lease agreements, on what are the expectations. And that's all rooted in our Arizona Landlord Tenant Act. So in Arizona specifically, on day 5 of non-rental payment, you can issue a notice of non-compliance, and then by day 10, you can start eviction proceedings. If you don't have a rental agreement in Arizona, what ends up happening is it really muddies up the entire situation, and we really can't proceed. Obviously, I would talk to an attorney out here, but that's just one example that if we think about folks accessing your property, Airbnb and VRBO give them essentially a direct access for very limited funds onto your property. So having a rental agreement is also extremely important if you do end up in a squatter situation, especially in a state that may not be like Arizona, where there may be more pro-tenant tendencies.
Yeah, so it's interesting topic you brought up there, Jeremy. So depending on the state, of course, I think the one state that allows it to be 90 days or more where it kicks into long term is North Carolina, but the rest are pretty much 28 to 30-day plus stays. That's when you get into long term. Anything below that would be a short term stay. And so when I draft a rental agreement, I actually don't even call it a rental agreement. I call it a license agreement. If you go on Airbnb, you'll scroll to the bottom and you'll see that they say that they are providing people a license to use a space. They're not providing a landlord tenant relation. They are providing a license, meaning that this is a license that can be revoked at any time, as opposed to having to go through the landlord tenant procedures of eviction, right? So that's why I frame my agreements as license agreements for those very reasons that you're talking about. And then also in my agreements, I always have these crazy robust clauses that say, if you hold over, it's going to cost you, depending on how much this property goes for per night, $200 per hour for a holdover, or more if you have a very luxury property, right? And also, by the way, we may tow your car, we may change the code on the lock, we may turn off Wi-Fi, all these different things to really encourage people to leave. I have had clients in a squatter situation. And so after those experiences, we did revise the agreement to make it this more robust, like, hey, these are the consequences if you hold over, to just really encourage people not to do it, right? Because we don't want to be in a squatter situation ever. It stinks, right? And it's up to your jurisdiction on whether they're gonna kick someone out if you call the cops and have them kick someone out, or if they're gonna make you go to landlord tenant court. You just don't want to be in landlord tenant court. That takes a long time to process. So you want to make sure that you just have a really solid agreement that can help kick someone out right away if there's any squatting. My favorite state for squatting laws is Virginia. They have a statute that just allows people, the cops, to come and kick someone out if they hold over for these short-term stays. So again, Arizona, a good state. Just really depends on what state you're in. It often is, a little more friendly and some of the red states versus the blue states. So just keep that in mind when you are, setting up your properties.
It's definitely a gray area. Like I held a meetup last night for short-term rental investors in the Phoenix metro, and one of the individuals that was there, he's a 3-bed, 2-bath, and then he's a 1-1 in the backyard. He lives in the 3-bed, 2-bath with his wife, and in the 1-bed, 1-bath, they had a last minute 28-day stay, and they're actually in a holdover situation right now. And they're in a very murky area because no rental agreement was provided. And the attorneys that they're currently working with are in a really weird loop where they said like no rental agreement was signed. The cops don't want to get involved as a result. So they're right now just hoping that they have 3 days. They basically are just hoping that they'll leave. But he said like otherwise we're just gonna have to go through with formal proceedings, like you said, in a court setting, which isn't fun. So it's just really
Yeah.
you have a lot of these things sorted out before you guys are in a situation that you have like a long-term stay. Some hosts actually will set their settings so that they can't go over 27 days or 28 days, which is another wrinkle.
Yeah, absolutely, Jeremy. And that situation for that guy, I mean, he can explore his options of just doing cash for keys too. Like that's a valid option for people where they can, pay folks to leave, right? And then the other thing in that sort of situation, since the cops aren't willing to help, it's, what here's like the risk of doing something like this. They could potentially do the thing where they turn off the internet, change codes while they leave or something like that. The risk would be that that person then sues and says that you did an unlawful eviction. And in many states, if you do an unlawful eviction, there's treble damages. Um, so that's just something that you have to decide. Do I really think this person's going to do that? Do I not? Just things like that that you can consider when you are deciding what to do. Depends on your risk tolerance.
Let's move on to talking about co-hosting, property management agreements, and partnerships. I see this all the time on the acquisition side, where folks say, "Hey, we're actually partnering up with a good friend, somebody about a networking group." What have you seen in terms of co-hosting, property management, and investment partners? Where can things go awry, Katie?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of things can go awry when for a partnership agreement when you don't have one, right? This may seem odd, but sometimes people buy properties together and they don't have any agreement other than a handshake. And I have a couple cases right now, actually 3 or 4 right now, where that is the case, and the folks are suing each other to sell the house. Doing a partition sale is what it's called, because they can't agree on what to do with the property anymore. So you want to document those if you're going to have a partnership agreement with anyone. You just want to put together perhaps an LLC together, or even just a JV agreement, like a joint venture agreement. But if you do an LLC, you can do everything through an operating agreement and explain, your roles and expectations. Okay, this person is going to do this. This person's going to do this. This is how much capital each person put in. Because even now, I've got capital disputes in one of my cases where one person's saying, no, I put in $5,000 extra, and the other person's saying, no, I put in $10,000 extra, and you owe me for being a general contractor. Things like that. So just really documenting like, okay, here's how much money I put in, here's how much money you put in, here's our roles and expectations. And by the way, if we decide to split up, here's what it looks like, here's how we'll do an appraisal, this is what everything will look like, and making it really clear. And so you can avoid that litigation, because litigation is super costly. It can end up costing you 30 grand. So setting a partnership agreement up on the front end could be, just a few grand versus not setting it up and then having a dispute and having to hire an attorney, can cost you tens of thousands of dollars. So I always recommend documenting those. And then on the co-host and property management side, this one's a dicey one too. If you don't have a co-host or property management agreement with whoever you're hosting for, or on the flip side, if someone's hosting for you, then same sort of issue. Like, what happens when you break up? What does it look like? Who pays for what? How much is the agreement? 20% gross, 20% net. What does that look like? What is net? You have to define all those terms in the agreement so that if there's any disputes, it's all in the agreement is the goal, right? That you just go back to the agreement and see what the agreement says, and the agreement would hold. The other tricky part with co-hosting and property managing is there's a lot of folks out there who are accidentally property managing when they're not intending to, right? They're trying to be co-host because they know they don't have a license to be a property manager, and they accidentally kind of roll into that property manager role by, collecting rent, doing tenant screening, doing leases and things like that. The issue with that is a lot of states actually require you to be a licensed property manager, and to be a licensed property manager, often you have to be a real estate broker, and that kind of depends state by state as well. But I would say the majority of states have some sort of licensing requirement to be a property manager. And so then if you don't have that licensing and you're property managing and you have a company for it, you can end up under investigation by the state authority, end up with fines, end up losing your clients, end up, just down, not in a good situation. So if you're not a licensed property manager, you shouldn't be doing it. And if you want to be doing it, you should be working with someone who is licensed and come up with some sort of partnership agreement there. That would be my recommendation for that. And then also, if you're trying to just stay in that co-host lane, you're going to want to use an attorney to set up the co-host agreement for you and to really tell you like how to try to, to stay in that co-host lane and not get into that property manager lane. Hopefully that all made sense for people, but it is something that I see people doing all the time is, it's so easy to sort of get into this property management for Airbnb owners. And so I see a lot of people doing it, but not realizing that there are actually strict licensing requirements for it. And then if something happened like at one of these properties, right, and you're not a licensed property manager, but you're holding yourself out like you are, that itself can be negligence per se because you're violating, an ordinance or a statute or regulation. So you really want to make sure that you have everything set up properly so someone can't say like, hey, this horrible thing happened and it happened because you are not a licensed property manager. And if you had been, it would not have happened, right? These are sort of arguments that attorneys will make.
That's a really great point on the licensure. A lot of folks don't realize that property managers need to have licenses in some states. And the reason being is that there's handling of funds. So what ends up happening is you're in a position where if we look at a long-term rental, property manager obviously can do all the marketing. But a lot of the risk is handling of the funds. Like you're a third party that essentially is collecting a deposit, holding a deposit, um, collecting rent, and then issuing rent to an owner. You're also paying for expenses. So a lot of that would be under like a trust accounting model. And for the most part, like there needs to be some sort of entity that is formally able to hold all of that, right? There's a lot of risk, especially from an attorney's perspective, that Katie could talk about for an attorney to say like, where was the money held? So let's say if we look at co-hosting or property management, let's say Airbnb pays you out as the property manager, and then you go through trust accounting to then issue a payment out to your host for, or their owner for their monthly 80% or 70%, whatever the agreement is. If there's some issues with that math or there's some issues with the handling of the money, I mean, it'd be a pretty easy case, I would think, Katie, for an attorney to come in and say, like, there's some negligence too on like the handling of the funds, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's all sorts of different things you could have at issue. Tax accounting too. And if you're on VRBO, in a lot of states you actually have to remit your own taxes. If you're doing direct bookings, yeah, there's a lot of different ways that an attorney could come in and say, hey, this wasn't handled right. But the trust accounting is a big one. I don't think a lot of people are doing that properly. Um, you know, and so really, if you're not a licensed property manager, I always say just please don't touch money. At the end of the day, like let's just don't touch it. You can have it set up so it's funneled directly to your clients, and if that means you can't host on VRBO or do direct bookings, that's fine. But just don't touch the money.
Another piece here is that I have a rule with my own investing that I don't invest in a partnership model unless I know the person for 6 months. I think that's like fairly intuitive just because I like to see people's ups and downs. I think like whenever there's an investment portrayed to us, it's really easy to get excited. Whoever's pitching the investment might be in a sales position. So I think it's important that if you are going to partner with somebody that you don't know super well, that you should probably get to know them just to see what they're like. When things aren't always so leafy and green. Now, if you're working with family, I think it's also important to understand that like there are risks that come up with family depending on your relationship. That if things go south, as Katie said, like you could have a really fun Thanksgiving dinner or really interesting Christmas. Another group here that we didn't is also you have contractors. A lot of us work with designers. A lot of us work with project managers to get our properties up and running. And I think it's also really important to also look at their contracts. I was in a situation for my second property that I acquired in 2023. That was the second interior designer I worked with, and um, I was essentially signed a contract that was extremely unfavorable to me, and also didn't leave a lot of room if there were any issues to arise to kind of like remediate the situation in my favor. And it's because like the interior designer provided her own contract. So we contracted that individual $30,000 to furnish a house, to set it up, design it, and we had pretty clear expectations on like what we thought that was going to look like. Turns out the house was half furnished, it was behind on schedule, so on and so forth. I think a lot of those have these experiences with service providers, especially ones that we just work with. So I think it's important to hire well. I think it's important to get references, but then I think it's also important to go to an attorney like Katie and say, "Hey, this individual who I've never done business before, but I do have references, provided me this contract. What do you think about the contract?" And if somebody really wants your business as a designer or an installer or a contractor, it's all negotiation. So I think it's important to get those contracts reviewed, just so that, if you're taking a big part of your nest egg or your net worth and investing it into a property and a project like this, I think it's important to make sure that you're also keeping those service providers that are bringing it to life accountable, in case something were to go awry.
Yeah, that's such a good point, Jeremy. All those agreements, I mean, I draft these agreements for people. I'm always going to draft them more favorable to them, right? They're master service agreements. They're going to be more favorable to that designer. They're drafted for them, right? But they will be willing to negotiate because I mean, I have clients who have them and they come to me and they're like, "Hey, my client came and they want this term removed." And, the ability to negotiate makes that agreement more enforceable if it was ever challenged in court. So if it is something that like they never were willing to negotiate on, it might be in a court ends up finding that that agreement's unconscionable, meaning that it's not enforceable because it was so one-sided. So Jeremy, in that your instance, it could be that if you had worked and challenged it some, it could be that a court was like, actually, this clause isn't enforceable because it's too one-sided. You never know how those are going to go. I mean, us attorneys try to put everything we can in there to benefit our clients, but definitely worth it, especially if it's, you're doing like a five-figure investment, to have an attorney review it. And I think that's pretty standard. Same with these co-host property manager agreements. Like if you're on the other side and you are, having someone property manage for you or co-host for you, I review these routinely on that side too, and look at them and tell people, okay, here's what you want to make sure you're looking out for. You want to make sure you're looking out for like hidden fees, insurance, make sure that they have insurance. Like great that you're adding them to insurance, but you want them to have insurance because what happens if something they do is negligence? Unplug your fridge and flood your house accidentally. You want to be able to go after them and not have to always use your insurance. Yeah, so there's a myriad of different things. But I love yours. I haven't heard that 6-month rule, Jeremy, and I love that because I'll tell you, people partner with folks, they think they know them and they don't. And so that's a great rule of thumb. Plus, on that piece too, like, you could potentially end up in like SEC rules if you're soliciting people you don't know to invest in investments with you, meaning that you would have to submit compliant documents to the federal government on like, hey, this was an investment, and I offered it to these people and they were accredited investors. Anyway, you just get into other compliance if you go to strangers. So you really should be only investing with people you know, unless you're going to involve an attorney and get into securities regulations for those stranger investments. But just really, making sure you understand the agreement. Those are really great points, Jeremy.
Katie, I'm curious because I'm seeing this um, come up more and more. There's a lot of M&A action currently happening with property management contracts.
Yeah.
So look at that from the perspective of an owner or a client of yours. Let's say you had a valid property management agreement, and let's say you came to me, Katie, and you said, "Hey, Jeremy, I like your property management business. Like, I'd like to hire you." Let's say I bundle up my contract, sell it to somebody else. How does it work in that case? Because I have a lot of clients that currently are in that position where they're like, "I don't even know who these people are. I don't want to work with them," but they have bookings till like next May, so they're kind of just stuck. Have you ever encountered that?
Okay, so in this scenario, I'm representing the property owner and their contract's now been sold to a third party.
Yeah,
Yeah, so it's going to depend on what the contract says, right? So a lot of these contracts will try to sneak in a clause that says that the contract's assignable. I mean, sneak in, I put it in if I'm representing the property manager to help them make it a more sellable business. Like, because some of these property managers, they want to build it up and then they
hmm
want to sell their contracts, right? And so there will be a clause in there that says this contract is assignable, meaning that they could assign it to someone else. So if they do that, I mean, you're kind of stuck, but there's always going to be some sort of termination rights, termination for cause. So perhaps there's some reason that maybe they're not meeting your expectations in some way and that you could terminate earlier than when the contract expires. But typically these agreements are a year long. So if you decide that you're with this new property manager, your contract's been sold, you don't like them, you could certainly exercise your normal termination rights and move on to a different property manager. Does that answer your question, Jeremy?
yeah, and I think some color to add as well is that I think there are a lot of property managers that are looking to sell their businesses. So I think as like an owner, it's really important to like get a feel for like where they're at, and ask them some questions, even if they aren't super honest about it. I think you can get a feel for it. But a lot of them will end up loading up their calendar all the way up until like the next year. So what it does is a few things. Like when they go to sell their business, it looks like they're actually selling a lot of accounts receivable. Like there's a lot of revenue on the book. So the new property managers, wow, that looks great. The second thing is I know a lot of termination clauses say, hey, you might have 60 days to terminate, 90 days, 120, so on and so forth. But if there's existing reservations have to be upheld because Airbnb will end up, you know, being punitive in terms of reviews, reputational damage, or also there are clawbacks on Airbnb. So I know a lot of property managers will sneak in clauses like that, which are normal. So I think it's important that if you're working with a property manager that might be on the larger end of the chain, between like maybe like 20 to like 50 properties, that's like really the sweet spot where folks are looking to maybe offload. It might be a good idea to have a conversation with your property manager about how far out you'll allow bookings. Airbnb SEO and rankings will improve if your calendar is wide open. But at the same point, you might also be leaving yourself to risk that they might end up selling the contract or signing it to somebody else, and then you bookings till next May. And the next thing you know, you're working with a company that you're not really interested in. So I think there's a lot
Right.
of pieces for owners to review, but these are all things that, we're just bringing up so you guys can um dot your I's and cross your T's before this happens.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's interesting too on the like person who's buying those contracts. A lot of times they'll actually do it as like an earn out, like that they might like pay initially like, I don't know, 5,000 per contract or something like that, 20,000 per contract, depending on the company, depending on how much the value of the rents are a year and that sort of thing. But then they might pay an extra five if they stay on for a couple of years. So that's how sometimes these are structured too, Jeremy, because of that risk that you're talking about, because there's certainly things that people can leave, their contracts that they're not permanent customers. So kind of interesting that is happening across the country. Definitely, people like to build these up and sell them to bigger operators.
Absolutely. Let's talk more about liability and risk documents. I know you deal with a lot of this, Katie.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, you can kind of roll this all into your rental agreement. But certainly, if you have anything like a bicycle, I know I had a client recently had ATVs at their property, a boat at their property. You might want to have separate agreements for those as well. And then I would certainly make anyone who uses them sign them so you don't run into that issue. Okay, only the booker signed. So you want to make anyone who's using any of those amenities, if you have a liability waiver for them, to sign them. You could do that as easy as having them locked up and you don't provide the code until it's signed. If it's bikes, you could have each individual bike line locked up and then you could have each person sign one. I understand that it's also hospitality, right? But I will tell you, I have my people sign, I have these 10 properties and I have people sign agreements all the time and I don't get pushback. Do I have cancellations? Yes, absolutely. Sometimes I have cancellations. Do they say why they cancel? No. Do sometimes I think maybe it's because of the agreement? Yes. Am I okay with that? Absolutely. Because I do believe my agreements prevent parties as well with my strict occupancy requirements. Because I'll have people say, like, hey, I'm looking at signing your agreement. I noticed that you only say you allow six, but by the way, my cousin, my aunt, my whoever, these 10 extra people also want to come. Is that okay? And I'm like, no, not okay. That's why I have this occupancy. We're not a party zone, okay? Not a party house. I mean, if you want to have a party, that's great, but it's not going to be at my house. And we do kick parties out. And so if they cancel, that's fine. I'm doing just fine. My properties are super booked. And so, if for me, I just like them. I like that they set the expectation. And if you don't want to sign it, then that's fine. My property is not for you. And I still get great reviews. My overall rating is, I think, 4.97, and I have 1,000+ reviews. Jeremy knows sometimes people give you a 4-star review. You can't avoid it. But, we can be very close. So I really do think these help, and I do recommend them. And I think signage also helps as well, because that's one of the things that a personal injury attorney will say. They'll be like, you didn't warn me of that risk. There's an open fire pit, and how was I supposed to know that this was a risk? So having a sign next to your fire pit, having a sign on your bunk bed, having a sign by your pool that says no diving, having a sign on your dock that says no diving. There's that $11.6 million verdict down in Alabama a few years ago for someone who dove off of a dock into 3 feet of water. And one of the reasons they said that the rental agreement wasn't sufficient is because it didn't say no diving in it. And it also, there was no sign out there that said no diving by the dock. And so they said that wasn't a sufficient warning to the guest to know of that risk. Didn't matter that this guest had a VAC of 0.26, so he was super drunk, dove into this 3 feet of water. The host was still held responsible at $11.6 million. So it's on you really to make sure that these properties are safe, to prevent that stupid behavior. Because what's going to happen is people are going to come to your properties, they're going to be happy, right? They're on vacation, they're having a good time, they're drinking, and so you got to really just make it as safe as possible for those scenarios.
That's a really great point. And I think from like a host perspective, we get asked all the time, even from like parents, like, do you guys have a pool gate? Do you have a pool fence? And I think I'm in a market here in Arizona where folks are always, they're looking to enjoy being outside. And to Katie, your point, like people are going to have some fun. They're going to let loose. From a parent's perspective, like if you don't have a pool fence, it's going to really be hard for a parent to enjoy their property because their little one might go running into the pool. So I think that's like a big one. Another one is just ensuring that you have like the right technology on your property. So I think having like locks, like the slodge end code's really great. Having like having a minute or a noise aware detector. I think also having cameras where legally permitted, like on the outside of the property is really important. So on our properties, a lot of folks say, hey, we're coming to stay. We feel really uncomfortable that there are cameras. And we're like, that's no problem. Like we absolutely need to have cameras. They say, well, there are a lot of people going to be in bathing suits, so on and so forth. And we just let them know like that we don't look at our cameras 24/7. But we need from a liability perspective to make sure that's there. And if they're not comfortable with that, we ensure that they go somewhere else. A lot of folks in my network, what they'll do is they'll use companies like Happy Guests or other third-party providers, where upon booking, before accepting a reservation, what they'll do is they'll provide a link to Happy Guests where they'll take IDs of the person on property that'll verify who they are, and then it'll additionally also have like any liability waivers, assumption of risk notices, any disclosures, any sort of protocol already embedded into that process. Like Katie would provide those and you would just upload them, and then it would just have e-signs and or checkboxes so that you have all that documentation. Again, to Katie's point, like a lot of folks will say, hey, we're not interested, but those aren't the folks that we want to host. At the end of the day, we're looking for people that are just coming to just be normal folks and enjoying our properties within the regular bounds of what a vacation should look like. A good example is here in Arizona. We've been having issues where high schoolers have basically been booking using their grandparents. So one of my friends had a situation where an elderly individual booked the house, and what ended up happening was 10 people showed up, all looked quite young. They opened up the garage door. They would come in with their car, and a clown car of high schoolers would come into the house. Then the garage door would open back up, and then there'd be another clown car of kids into the house. And the reason they'd go through the garage is because there wasn't any cameras showing the amount of folks in the house. It turns out there was a massive party. So I think there's things that we can do, like locking our back gates, not allowing garage access, having all the technology. Like I know that there's something going on at my properties when my door lock opens and closes pretty rapidly over the span of like 5 or 6 minutes. Folks typically don't lock the door in and out if it's the same person. So I think there's some telltale signs that you can pick up on. Um, but I think it's setting those clear expectations are really, really important. Um, and a part of that also just comes with just being like a good neighbor. Like a lot of this stuff also just has to do with like liability and protecting your asset. But you also don't want to be that person on the block that is consistently having noise complaints or issues because you also can get sued by your neighbors. I'm sure you've seen stuff like that, Katie.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Neighbor disputes are quite popular. I've had, clients get sued by their neighbors, usually over deed restrictions. So that
Sure.
is enforceable in Michigan, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, you don't want to be that bad neighbor. That can lead to people like going to town meetings and saying we should ban short-term rentals in our community because this horrible party house next to me. You can get it. You live at home. You wouldn't want an Airbnb party house right next to you, in a residential neighborhood. That sort of goes back to due diligence too, and just making sure when you buy a property that the right location. Just because you can short-term rent something doesn't mean you necessarily should. So if it's in a residential neighborhood, you just might want to think about what that would look like and whether that house is a good house to short-term rent because of these neighbor disputes. Because, hosting at the end of the day, you're going to have to deal with these neighbors. And if you have a bad neighbor, that can make your hosting experience pretty miserable. So part of my due diligence at this point is to go next door if there are neighbors at the property I'm buying and just talk to them about it. Tell them, hey, I'm going to be short-term renting this property. Do you have any issue with that? And then they might tell you stuff too, like, oh, I don't have an issue, but by the way, we all hate it. And we're going to the meeting every Tuesday and we're telling them to ban them. And we will make your life miserable if you buy here, whatever. So then it's like, okay, I'm not going to buy that property. Personally, at this point too, I just love properties that have like acreage. I want to be on 5, 10 acres. I don't want neighbors. I know that's not practical everywhere, probably not practical in Arizona, especially at your pool properties, but it's just nice, to have no neighbors. Then you have to worry about the noise as much, anything like that. Because at the end of the day, people on vacation, they're outside more, they're having a good time, and they might not fit in with that neighborhood vibe if they are in a neighborhood. Granted, a lot of properties in the short-term rental world end up being in vacation communities. And so maybe the vibe is that vacation vibe. So it just kind of really depends where you're going. But those are great points, Jeremy.
Yeah, I agree, Katie, that we also it goes both ways with guests and owners, right? Guests are going to come to your property, like let's say you're in Florida, Arizona, Texas, so on and so forth. It's summertime. You probably want to really enjoy the outdoor space. So, do they really want like a cramped yard? No, they want some. They want a nice like plush yard. So I usually during the acquisition process make sure that we're looking at least at a fifth of an acre. I mean, in an urban market, that's a little bit bigger than most, but the sweet spot's usually like a quarter, if not a third of an acre. But also from a privacy perspective is like your guests don't want like you to be they don't want to be on top of their on top of the community. They can't really enjoy themselves. The neighbors might be leering right at them as they're barbecuing and hanging out. And for your perspective as a host, there's a lot more soundproofing, right? There's a lot more space in between the yards. I always go up to the neighbors and introduce myself, and this is how the conversations always go. Hi, my name's Jeremy Holden. I'm your new neighbor. I won't be living here. This is going to be a short-term rental, and I usually get a disgruntled face. And the neighbors will just start telling me how much they're not excited for us to be in the community, and they wish somebody else purchased the house. And I always say to them, they always say, we're a really close-knit block, like we all know each other. This just isn't going to fly. And I say, at some point, you were the new person on the block, and everybody probably thought something very similar about you. And I said, just because we're the new person on the block doesn't mean that we're not great people, but it's my responsibility to show you that we're responsible, we're great neighbors, and just because we're a short-term rental, that we're not going to, be causing any trouble. I said, have you ever stayed in a short-term rental before? And the answer is usually yes. And then I asked them, what do you do when you're on a short-term rental? And they say, we usually have a beer, we usually play some music, we usually barbecue, and like Chris Stapleton's playing, and then I'm usually passed out by 11 o'clock. And from there, I always say, well, that's great because those are the same type of people that are coming to our house. And the onus is on me to show you that. Here's my phone number. If anything ever happens, let me know. And I'm usually really good friends now with all of my guests, all of my neighbors. We're uh, talking about their kids. One of my neighbors actually takes his kid is 16, plays on the football team in Peoria. He takes out my garbage for me. I wanted to give him a few extra bucks. So I think just having good communication with your neighbors is always great. But again, like going over liability waivers, assumption of risk notices, all the legalities that Katie reviewed with us today is just really important so that regardless of your relationship with your neighbor or regardless of your relationship with that really nice guest, if something were to happen, we do have proper documentation to keep us protected.
That's right, Jeremy. Yeah.
We'll go through some Q&A. I know that we did have some questions in the chat. I know that Lady Ann asked, what is the best way to protect me against liabilities in the case where there's a pool and a hot tub and the property's in Florida?
Yeah. So Florida has a really strict pool statute or regulation explicitly saying what is required for pools. Because I think drowning for children is a really high risk in Florida. It's like one of the number one causes of death for children. So they really take it very seriously in Florida. So there's a statute that you have to comply with. I do have a Florida pool agreement. If that would be interest of you, you can reach out. But you know, I would say having people sign that pool agreement, but then on the second piece, having people, making sure that your pool is in compliance with the Florida regulation, having pool alarms, having a fence, having depth markers, all of that sort of thing to make your place really safe. Having a shepherd's hook at the pool would be recommended, or some sort of life-saving equipment if people are unable, if they're swimming and they need help getting out of the water. I would not recommend having floaties. So flotation, like I don't know, the pink flamingos, whatever, anything like that, because they have been known to hide someone who's drowning. If that makes sense, someone would be drowning under them and you cannot see them. And there has been a death in a short-term rental in that way. So if you're going to have something like flotations or like, I don't know, tubies or whatever, have them be clear. I actually was recently at the Park Hyatt in Chicago, and they have a swimming pool, and we were there, and every single one of their flotation devices was clear, and it made me think about it because I had just heard about that death at a short-term rental with the flotation devices, and I was like, that's probably why, right? The hotels have experienced it too. So just like things like that to make your pool really safe, making sure too that you have some sort of pool signage rules, right? Like no lifeguard on duty. Here are my rules. You must be of certain age to be in the pool by yourself. Otherwise, the children have to be supervised at all times, things like that. And then also having the address of the property on that placard. So if someone had to call 911, they know where to say they are. Because if you're at a property, you don't know the address, right? You're on a vacation. Like I'm actually on vacation right now. And I'm like, I don't know the address I'm at. Like if something were to happen, I'd have to go try to look up on Airbnb. Okay, what is this address? So it's really helpful to have that even at your houses as well. So, in case of emergency, you are here. And so those are the sort of things that I'd recommend for a pool. Hot tub, same thing. I'd have a hot tub sign, and just, really clear expectations with the hot tub, making sure that people are showering before the hot tub and pool because that'll keep the place nice and clean. And I'm with Jeremy. I'm a pro camera person for pools. There's these debates I see on Facebook all the time. Can I have a camera over a pool? Can I not have a camera? My insurance company is saying I can't have a camera because of privacy concerns. I'd love to see a privacy lawsuit about an outdoor camera over a pool. I have not seen one. I've seen privacy lawsuits on indoor cameras. Definitely don't have an indoor camera. Okay. That's a huge verdict. That would be, I think there's a $45 million verdict in either North Carolina or South Carolina. Sorry, I get the Carolinas confused, for someone in an Airbnb who had a camera inside, but they were predatory. They were a terrible person. They're going to prison. And they also have this, huge verdict, of course, which is meaningless because they don't have any way to pay it. But definitely there are privacy concerns for those indoor cameras. Do not do those. But the outdoor camera, you disclose it, you let them know, like Jeremy said. It's like, I'm not looking at it. It's just there in case something happened. So we know what actually happened. So if someone drowns in this pool and they say, well, it's because of you, because of a faulty pool alarm. Well, actually, the camera shows that unfortunately you guys were just having too good of a time and not paying attention, right? Because that's what happens. Oh, and then of course, water watcher tags. I don't know if you guys have heard of a water watcher tag. They sell them on Amazon, they sell them on Etsy. I think you can actually get them free from somewhere. But they're these tags that say that, you designate a certain person to watch the kids in the pool. Because if everyone's watching the kids in the pool, no one's watching the kids. I don't know if any of you have children. I've got kids and I've got a bunch of nieces and nephews. I've got three siblings. So we all have kids. And if we're all together, we're all just sort of chatting and we're all at a pool, we might all assume everyone's watching, but no one is, right? So it's really important to have that designated person who is that water watcher. I actually have a whole checklist, so I can, send that out to you. Sorry, who was this? Lady Ann. Okay, Lady Ann. If you want it, you feel free. I'll just put my email here. You just email me and we'll get you that checklist on the pool safety, and we'd be happy to give that to you. Other question is, do you always recommend to put the property in LLC? I certainly do. I certainly do. I can't think of a situation where I would not recommend it. I think it's the best way to do it. I recommend doing it from the get-go. So like at closing, I would recommend just transferring that property right to the LLC. There are complications in terms of the due on sale clause with your loan potentially. But if you have a loan that's backed by Fannie or Freddie, which most people do because those are conventional loans, they actually allow for you to put the property into LLC. Not all mortgage brokers know this. Not all lenders know this, but it's actually in the Fannie Freddie guidelines. So you might have to educate them a little bit that it's okay to do. But a lot of them do, and they'll say, yeah, that's fine. You can close in your name and then transfer right after. The nice thing about doing it on the day of close is you're not going to avoid your title insurance. If you don't do it on the day of close, you are going to avoid your title insurance. Title insurance is important. Title insurance covers your property if, like, say, there's some sort of encumbrance or lien or something like that that was not discovered during that title search, that you could then have title insurance to cover. And I've had clients use their title insurance, so I do think it's important that you have it. So if you do a transfer the same day, you can often get the LLC covered as well. But yes, I do recommend that you put the property into an LLC, and then as you get let's say you have a net worth above 10 million, then you can start thinking about asset protection trust. Those are more expensive, but for most people, an LLC is sufficient.
Do we have any other questions? Feel free to put them in the chat, guys. Yeah, we had somebody at one of our properties a few years ago, and we just assumed that putting up all the signage and everything was enough with our pool. We had an individual that gave us 5 stars, but let us know that we ended up. They basically told us that they couldn't swim, but they just jumped into the pool, into the deep end, and almost drowned. And we thought
Oh,
it was like very. We just thought it was like common sense just to look down at the pool and say, okay, like this is the deep end. And we had signage, so we actually had to beef up our signage, and that's when we decided to put cameras in because now the cameras show like, hey, there's enough signage, everything's like clearly marked. Um,
do you have depth markers, Jeremy?
yeah, we do. I
Did
also
you
think,
then?
yeah, we did have depth markers as well. They just didn't speak. Their native tongue wasn't English, so I think
Mm,
there was like a little bit of like a nuance. I was also gonna chime in that I've had situations where folks have had layered entities, meaning like you have an LLC, but then the LLC is then owned by a parent company. A lot of folks will use this will use like a Wyoming, specifically like a Wyoming parent company, because in Wyoming they have like extremely, like they're pretty rock solid. Katie, do you want to talk about that?
yeah, I can. I actually think the Wyoming LLC is kind of like a myth too, like a internet like thing, if that makes sense, phenomenon.
Mhm.
But a lot of people like the Wyoming LLC because of the anonymity that you in Wyoming don't have to say who owns the LLC. Well, I'll tell you, like a lot of states are like that. And you don't actually have to say who owns the LLC or anything like that. For example, in Michigan, you don't have to put who owns the LLC. You just have to put the organizer. And so the organizer can be your attorney. So I make LLCs all the time and I'm the organizer. So I'm on a lot of LLCs as my firm. But you can so like a lot of states have the same protections that Wyoming have. And then at the end of the day, if it ends up being like this choice of law, I don't even know that Wyoming law is going to apply. If your Airbnb is in Arizona, Wyoming law might not apply
100%.
because, so that doesn't even make sense to me. But
Same thing with qualifications is like I've also had situations where like clients have gone through that very costly process to just find out that like properties in Arizona, like letters like I'm only gonna like lend on the Arizona LLC. Like I can't vest this in the title of like a Wyoming LLC. And
correct.
then they'll be like in a very awkward position where they'll go to the attorney and say, hey, why did we spend a lot of all this money if I'm still vesting title in the Arizona LLC. Also, 99% of residential loans are personally guaranteed as well. So I think a lot of clients will do is they'll say, okay, like if I have an LLC, like I'm still not really on the hook. Like if I go bankrupt, I'm not on the hook for the loan. 99% of loans, especially Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, you still sign a personal guarantee. So there's also that consideration as well. Do you want to answer
Yeah,
questions, Katie, in the chat?
sure. Answer some of those, but also for your example you gave too, even if hypothetically you were able to quit claim a property into that Wyoming LLC, not in Wyoming, like in Arizona, you're still going to have to file with the state of Arizona now that you have a foreign entity doing business in that state. And if that state requires you to say who's in that foreign entity, then you're going to have to do it. So there's really no getting around state rules of disclosing who's in the LLC if they so require. Anyway, so I could go on about Wyoming
Yeah.
LLCs for all day, but let's see. Sorry if you already answered this, but for mortgages owned by Fannie Freddie, owned by Redwood Residential Acquisition Corporation, what options do we have to quit claim into an LLC? I've also heard about a land trust too. Yeah, you can do land trust as well. That I would recommend if you don't have a mortgage that's owned by Fannie Freddie, because Fannie Freddie allows you to do that transfer. I put the link in the chat. I'll put it in again. Um, land trusts are just going to be a little more expensive than an LLC, but they can be just as effective because you can have the um, land trust basically held by the LLC. So it's like kind of a workaround because a trust is a permitted transfer. It won't trigger the due on sale clause. How about liability for properties on a private road? How do we protect ourselves? The same way that you would be protecting yourself with a property that's not on a private road. I mean, you're going to have to maintain your private road, of course, but you can transfer the property into an LLC, have a rental agreement, have good insurance, and have, safety in place.
Thank you, everybody, for coming in today. We really appreciate your time. Thank you, Katie, for taking time to educate all of us on these topics. If anybody wants to get in touch with STR Law, here is their information. Here's Katie's information. Katie also has her her email address in chat. What's the best way to get in touch with you, Katie?
Yeah, I mean, if people want to book a call, a consultation, that would be right there, the way to book a call with me. And then I also hold a monthly webinar too, so I'll put the registration for that in the chat. I kind of go into depth on some of these topics. I'm holding one next week as well. And I also offer a Q&A at that. And then I usually do some sort of promotion for my business at the webinars, some sort of bonus as it relates to my templates and things like that. So if anyone's interested in joining, I would love to have you there. It's always great to chat with a bunch of different owners, talk about different things, hear what's happening in people's businesses. I always learn something because people come up with these crazy scenarios. I'm like, that happened? I cannot even believe it. Like recently, I had someone have a scenario where someone left like $10,000 cash at a property, right? So my rental agreement got updated again, lost items. What are we going to do with those, right? Anyway, that would be the best way to connect with me. And this looks like Jeremy's got his Instagram in there, which is awesome. I'm going to have to connect with you. And I can put my Instagram in there too. I do a lot of tips for folks on just keeping your Airbnb safe.
Thank you so much, Katie. This would be the best way to get in touch with Savvy. If you're looking to get educated about a specific market, we have agents in most of the STR-friendly markets. If you're between different options or just want to have like a call, this is the best way to get in touch with our team. If you're more interested in Arizona or want to get in touch with me to connect you with our team, feel free to go to the link that Lou put in, savvy-agents.com, and then you'll find my landing page on my Instagram. We also have a lot of tips, tricks, and a lot of education. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to hearing from you. Have a great day, everybody.